to the panel that I've been on the receiving end of Senator Warren's challenging questions before. She was my professor in law school, and you did a much better job handling her questions than I ever did when I was in law school. We live in a globalized world. America is competing with, American companies are competing with companies around the world. One argument you hear in favor of the Ex-Im Bank commonly is a reference to arms control language, that we can't unilaterally disarm. Between the Europeans and the Chinese and the dozens of other export credit agencies around the world, it would be unwise for the United States to let the Ex-Im Bank unwind its operations and wind down. Mr. Rougie, could you respond to that argument with the strongest counter-argument you have?
So this argument's assumption is that it would hurt the United States overall to disarm, to drop these export subsidies. And I think there is a pretty strong case to be made that it's not very clear-cut. I mean, I think as Dr. Strain has shown, I mean, there are ways in which actually these type of export subsidies are damaging to the economy as a whole. Moreover, I think that what we should aspire to do if we want to promote export is to do it in a more general basis. And there are a lot of actually sound policy that we should be implementing rather than actually just targeting on special winners without considering the cost, such as, for instance, the reform of the corporate income tax, which is extremely punishing, especially for companies that are competing abroad. Why don't we stop these type of targeted subsidies to a few and expand and implement policy that would benefit everyone, even the non-exporters?
Mr. Strain, do you have anything to add?
I do, Senator. I agree with that. I think that the argument about unilateral disarmament is a strong argument that supporters of the Ex-Im Bank have. I think that the argument presupposes that the policies of the Ex-Im Bank are a net positive and are engaging in this battle, you know, in an effective way. And I think that really is not well supported by the evidence. It very well could be the case that so-called unilateral disarmament actually is better for the United States as a whole, even if it is worse for the particular companies that we've heard from the Chamber and from NAM. And so I think we have to maintain some level of humility about what it is exactly that the government is able to know will happen when an economic policy is put in place. We're talking about essentially a situation of concentrated benefits and diffuse costs, and we've heard quite a bit from the Chamber and from NAM about who benefits in a concentrated way. And the question simply is, are the diffuse costs greater than the concentrated benefits? They're much harder to measure. It's much harder to know. And I think that the weight of the evidence suggests that with export subsidies, they probably are greater than the concentrated benefits. And so unilateral disarmament may be bad for these specific companies, but it may be good for the United States as a whole.
Mr. Rougie.
Sorry, I forgot to add that it is worth pointing that it's not a majority of what Ex-Im does. I mean, according to its own justification data, only roughly a little over 30% of what Ex-Im does is justified as countervailing export subsidies. So almost 70% of what Ex-Im does has nothing to do with competing with export subsidies abroad.
And Senator, if I could just add very quickly.
Actually, I'd like to hear the other side. Mr. Murphy.
So over the weekend, I was reading Chairman Hochberg's testimony for the House Financial Services Committee, and he recounted how he was recently at a meeting of the 79 export credit agencies from around the world. Dozens of them explained how they plan to be expanding the export finance that they make available. Precisely 2 said they intended in the years ahead to be cutting it. That was Austria and Norway. The Chinese were silent. China has 3 what they call policy banks. One is China Ex-Im. 2 other banks provide similar levels of support. There is a gusher of export credit agency support coming out around the world, And in our experience, what we hear from our member companies time and again is that it can make a determination, even in cases where it isn't used, as a kind of deterrent effect, the fact that it could be used in some cases, it can turn the sale away from the American exporter to a competitor from abroad. And that's why we think we shouldn't be the only country in the world not to have one of these agencies.
Ms. Dempsey, you look as if you wanted to add something.
Thank you. I totally agree. I wanted to point out that when Dr. Duruji was talking about that a certain percentage of EXIM's transactions aren't dealing with subsidies or dealing with market failures. In fact, yes, they are. The pie chart that she put in her testimony, and I'm happy to provide one as a follow-up, ignores the small business side, ignores the types of loans where the OECD says that EXIM can only finance up to 85%, and so that other 15% is what's unaccounted for. Those loans, of course, wouldn't happen but for EXIM, and there are areas where there's market failure. The U.S. has led the world in trying to eliminate market distortions in export credit. We've been pretty successful at the OECD overall, and then in sectors like aircraft and renewables and lots of other sectors. We're having a hard time with the developing world. They're trying to increase, as Mr. Murphy explained. And if the U.S. takes itself out, if we don't have an export-import bank, what do we think is going to happen? You don't know what the theory is going to happen there? What we're seeing on the ground is exactly what Mr. Murphy was saying. They're expanding. They want to grow their economies, and they want to grow it through exports. And they're going to go forward regardless, but it's probably going to get worse, and it's going to make it harder for manufacturers to be able to win these sales overseas.
If in a more perfect world, the United States could actually persuade all of the countries around the world with ECAs to eliminate theirs, would you then believe that we should eliminate the EXIM Bank?
As long as the market can deal with the issues that exporters in our country need. Small businesses can't use their exports as collateral when they're trying to get a loan from a commercial bank, and that means they're not going to, we've got companies who mortgage their personal house. We need to deal with that type of failure. We need to deal with commercial banks that aren't able to do long-term loans or loans into emerging countries. So we've got those issues to deal with. But yes, if we can move to a system where we discipline out these export credit agencies, let's go forward.
Thank you all.